Hello and welcome to another Smaulgld live stream. Today is July 2nd, Monday, 2018. And tonight we're going to talk about Silicon Valley's U.S. Treasury Hoard. Got some unique statistics that you might be interested in hearing about. All right, let's take a look though at what happened during the day in the gold and silver markets. Another day and another down day for gold was down to $1,241, down about $6 to $7. Silver fell well below the $16 mark, down to $15.84. That is now taking the gold-silver ratio to about 78 to 1. So the gold-silver ratio is creeping back up the last few trading sessions. And that's not because gold is outperforming silver to the upside. It's just not getting hit as hard on the downside. Another ratio to be aware of, which is really out of whack, is the gold-platinum ratio. Historically, platinum has traded to a premium of about 1 to 1.2 to 1 to the price of gold. So if gold was $800, platinum would be about $850, something like that. But over the last couple of years, it hit parity and it's gone straight down, straight up on the ratio. The current gold-platinum ratio is 1.5 to 1. That means that gold is 50% higher in price than platinum. Platinum dropped to $814, and gold is at $1,241. There's a $600 difference between the two. That's one of the widest margins ever. Also, palladium, which used to be probably half the price of platinum, is now worth significantly more than platinum. Platinum is worth $814 an ounce right now, and palladium $937. So palladium's gone up, platinum's gone down, gold has gone sideways the last few years. So palladium's the big winner in all this. And palladium and platinum are very similar, have similar industrial uses, although they're saying that platinum is going down because they're anticipating more electric cars, and therefore they won't need it as much in the catalytic converters, especially they're moving away from diesel, and platinum is used a lot in the diesel cars. A lot of the Mercedes-Benz cars, I think, are diesel in Germany, so they think that's a reason. But platinum, if you just want to go on rarity, above ground platinum, annual platinum mining production is about 1/10 of that of gold. So this is why I say all the time when people say silver is rarer than gold, and silver must be at the same price. The relative rarity is really not a determinative of price. So people who have this idea in their head that silver has to return to some natural ratio, either in the above ground or in ground or whatever, doesn't. It has to do with the relative valuations of the commodities, not the relative rarity. Rarity can play into it, but as you see in the platinum case, it doesn't, because if there's less use for it or there's less desire for it. So platinum used to get a strong support, not just from its industrial use, but rich Japanese in the 80s and 90s went nuts for it. They thought that was the best metal to have. It was a status symbol. You got platinum. Many places you hear about a platinum standard or a platinum card on American Express or Visa being ahead of gold. But right now, gold is worth 50% more than platinum. So the gold standard, I would say, rules today, not the platinum standard. However, if palladium keeps moving up, now palladium is also rare. We may have a palladium standard, and we'll have gold medals, silver medals, and bronze medals. Maybe that'll be replaced with palladium medals, gold medals, silver medals, bronze medals, and finally platinum medals. So we'll see where that goes, but that's just an observation for today on the precious metals markets. Now, Silicon Valley. Hello, Miser. First I've heard regarding title. Well, what I've noticed, I might as well diverge here while we wait for people to show up. We've got just 5 one of the problems we have, I think, in the alternative media is the cherry picking of data, and then not just the cherry picking of data, but then the awarding of significance to that data. Russia's dumping treasuries. End of the game over. This is a game changer. They're dumping treasury. It means death of the dollar, dollar collapse, end of dollar hegemony, de-dollarization. You get this hysteria based on a cherry-picked piece of data. So even if it's true, yes, Russia dumped treasuries. They had 86 billion and now they have 46 billion. Without knowing anything else, you don't even have to know the size of the treasury market. You don't even have to know anything. You just hear they sold half their treasuries. It's game over. Well, then put that all in context. Most people don't know that the size of the U.S. Treasury market is $40 trillion. The fact that Russia is dumping treasury is largely irrelevant. It really doesn't matter one bit at all, at least not in terms of the pricing of treasuries. They can dump the rest of them today. The 46 million, 47 million that they have will not make a stitch of difference. The treasury market is huge, deep, and even China could dump its $1 trillion worth of treasuries. There's 40 trillion of them out there. First of all, China is not going to ever dump, no one is ever going to dump all of their treasuries. This is not like manipulation of gold and silver. China's not going to dump $1 trillion worth of treasuries on the market all at once. Why? Because internally, their state-owned enterprises are run on dollar-denominated borrowing. Most people don't know that. The Chinese issued $120 billion worth of U.S. dollar-denominated bonds, the state-owned banks, in order to fund their operations. Why? Because no one wants to get paid back in yuan. Why doesn't anyone want to get paid back in Chinese yuan? Because they can devalue at any point. So when China borrows, they borrow in dollars. Their economy runs on dollars. Dumping $1 trillion worth of treasury would create bankruptcy for them, because that would mean then they would be harming the dollar. They'd be selling their treasuries, losing money if they were dumping them all at once, and then destroying their internal bond market. It's not going to happen. But even if it did, the short-term damage would be devastating for China, and the treasury market would probably recover. So it's not going to happen. It doesn't make sense for it to happen. That is, again, that's a gold pumper narrative that China is fed up and they're going to dump the dollar and they're going to combine with the BRICS and de-dollarization. That's just, they're not looking at the whole picture. Oh, China's got a deal where they're going to, okay, let's get into what the purpose of tonight's talk is about. Silicon Valley U.S. Treasury hoard. And again, I've cherry-picked this data, but I'm going to try to put it into context for you so you don't just say, come out away with saying Apple has more treasuries than Belgium. That's not true. Apple actually has more treasuries than Russia. Okay? Google, Alphabet Corp, as it's called, has more treasuries than Sweden does. Combined, Apple and Google have more treasuries than Korea, than Canada, than Germany, than Bermuda. So, but that doesn't mean anything. But it's still interesting because most people probably don't know that. Now, why is that important? Okay. So, first of all, when people talk about Russia's dumping treasuries, they don't know the size of the overall market, so they don't know what the significance is. Same thing when Russia's buying gold, hand over fist. They know what's coming. They don't know how much gold they're buying, and if they do know, they know the number might be they bought 18 tons last month. So what? There's 2,600 tons of gold mined every year. If Russia adds 224 tons of gold a year, that's still not a big deal. And you have to look at it in the context of where are the other large gold flows. 900 tons of gold going into India. So just looking at Russia or any of these hysterical headlines about someone doing something, you have to know the context of the whole market. So the reason I want to focus on Silicon Valley is this is something I looked at last year and I just updated the numbers. Apple, which is a cash monster, obviously has to put that cash somewhere after it sells you those iPhones and collects its profit. It can't use all that money to buy back its shares, so it has to put it somewhere, and it puts a lot of it in treasuries. Apple, as at the end of March 2018, the most recent quarterly report, showed $56.7 billion. Now, let me just explain something else. I don't pull these numbers out of some article or hear it on somebody on YouTube ranting about some cherry-picked data. I actually go to the source. I go to the SEC website, and I pull out the filing, and I look for their cash and marketable securities and what they have on their balance sheet. That's where I find this from. I cherry-picked it, but I cherry-picked it for the purpose of putting it into context. So Apple has $56.7 billion worth of U.S. Treasuries. Now remember, the fear has always been the foreigners are dumping treasuries, they're de-dollarizing. Well, first of all, remember, the market is 40 trillion. Foreigners have about 6 trillion of that. China has about 1.1 trillion. Japan about 1 trillion. All right. So any one country, even when they have 1 trillion, is 1/40th of the overall size of the market. And as I mentioned at the top, they're not going to dump them all at once because they often have many connections to the dollar. That would be shooting themselves in the foot, biting their nose to spite their face. But you see, when people want to pump a story, they assume that China is acting emotionally because you want the price of gold to go higher. You want these things to happen. So they attach China's had it. And they make these quotes where they need to do this or they need to do that. And everybody believes them and they get all excited and they say, yes, China to crush the dollar. Russia's had it. Russia can't do anything. Russia's biggest threat is the nuclear threat, and I mean actual nuclear threat. It has nothing to do with its treasury holdings. Russia can do damage through espionage. It can do damage through hacking. It can do damage through launching nuclear weapons. It can't do any damage dumping treasury bonds. It can't do any damage buying gold from its own mines. This is what's disturbing to me, is that people, they look at these numbers and, oh, Russia's dumping treasuries. Russia's adding gold. They know what's coming. They have no say in what happens in the U.S. Treasury market. All right, now nor does Apple. So Apple right now has $56.7 billion in U.S. Treasuries, just sitting on its balance sheet. Russia has, according to the latest, $48.7 billion. So Apple actually has more control, which is none, over the U.S. Treasury market than Russia. So if Russia were to dump the remaining treasuries that it has, I'll report on it, but someone else will report on it, and it'll be game over, game changer, de-dollarization, end of the dollar hegemony. You'll hear all these stories because Russia knows what's coming. Russia's buying gold hand over fist, not understanding the total size of the treasury market. All right, let's go on. Google has $51 billion in U.S. treasuries. By the way, Apple also has $5.5 billion in what you call agency securities, agency debt. So they have stuff like Freddie Mac, Fannie Mae, TVA. They have all these government-sponsored entities, Farmer Mac. They don't list which ones they have. But these agency bonds are basically backed by the U.S. government. But the main holdings they have, Apple, $56 billion in U.S. treasuries. Now, Google, as I mentioned, they claim to have $51 billion, and they don't split them out. They say they have a combination of the two, but I bet they're probably geared towards the treasuries as well. Facebook has $13 billion worth of U.S. treasuries. So Facebook, the $13 billion worth of U.S. treasuries, that's about half of what Spain has, half of what Australia has, about a third of what Australia has. So Facebook, and it's amazing that Facebook even has that much cash because they're not the same profit-making machines that Google and Apple are, but Facebook still has $13 billion. Cisco has $13 billion in U.S. treasuries. Amazon, same issue with Amazon as Facebook, not so profitable, but it still has $3.6 billion in U.S. treasuries. So if you just take Apple, Facebook, Google, and Cisco, you're looking at like $130 billion just in those four Silicon Valley companies. They have about as many Treasury securities to put them in the top 10 around where India is. India has about $150 billion worth of U.S. Treasuries. China, as we mentioned, is 1.1 trillion. Then you go to Japan. The United Kingdom has 262 billion. So in the aggregate, Silicon Valley, just those, I'm sure there's probably 250 billion if you add up all the Silicon Valley companies in U.S. Treasury security holdings. Now remember, there's U.S. Treasury security holdings in so many other places, in pension funds, sovereign wealth funds, all over the world. It's not just what central banks might hold. In fact, the numbers that I read to, these are just the numbers, not of the central banks of these countries, but actually the holdings of the jurisdiction of origin of the people or entities that have the treasuries. And for the most part, it's probably a lot of it in the central banks. So Apple, Google, Facebook, and Cisco have a very large share of U.S. treasuries. Yeah, so if you just look at it in the aggregate, you have to always take a look at each piece of data, not in isolation. I mean, it's nice to say Russia has this, or Russia's done that, or China's done this, or China does that. I think I did a live stream a while back, and it was, so what? Well, what does it even mean? I think the title was called "It Just Doesn't Matter." So be very wary when somebody gives you a piece of data. They're all breathless and telling you, "Oh, look at this. No one's talking about this. Game over, game changer, whatever it is." Some mine shut down. Okay, how much did it produce? What's the impact going to be? And of course, they generally don't just give you the information. They then give you the consequence, which is made up. I mean, nothing flows from it other than you just believe them, and then they repeat it. And I see it constantly, people repeating stories. This is happening. Russia's doing this. China. And no one ever checks the base numbers. No one ever checks what it means. And I suppose that's what I'm here for. I hope that's what makes this channel unique, is that I try to look at not the hype. I'm not trying to deconstruct hype. That's just what ends up happening when I take a further look at the numbers. I think the people that actually hype the stories, I don't think they purposely hype them. I actually think they probably believe Russia's dumping treasuries, and therefore it's going to have this de-dollarization effect, and it's going to be the end of the world for the dollar. They believe that because the word dump means you're getting rid of, and then they extrapolate, well, there's a trend, and China's going to dump the dollar, and the dollar's going to be over, and it's multipolar world, and then next thing you know, gold is 50,000, and people are trading gold coins again. All right, well, that about does it for tonight's story, and it looks like Miser knew there were cash cows, but is it in any form like bonds and making them start? Now, Miser, what's interesting, I wasn't, here's something else to know. I just gave you some very cherry-picked data. And these companies also own, and I don't have it in front of me, because I was using the U.S. Treasury numbers to make a point that there's a lot of treasuries being held in Silicon Valley. What if Silicon Valley dumps their treasuries? So you can look at it that way. They might. I mean, now that they don't have, now they want to invest in the United States, they might want to sell some treasuries and invest the money or buy stocks. But anyway, what I was giving you was just their treasury holdings. You can't extrapolate from that Apple has $56 billion in cash. They have a lot more than that. They have some of the companies have marketable securities. Some of them have corporate bonds. Some of them even have foreign bonds. So I wasn't trying to, and nor did I say I was, that this is the cash position of Apple, Google, Facebook, and Cisco. I was just pointing out that this portion of their cash is in, or cash equivalents, is in U.S. Treasury securities or Treasury notes. Some are long-term, some are short-term. So again, it wasn't meant to give the Apple cash position or the Google cash position. It was meant to put their Treasury positions in the context of a $40 trillion U.S. Treasury market. What they have is also insignificant, but what they have, if you compare it to Russia, it's bigger than Russia. But people think Russia is significant. So you can see where I'm going with this, is if you just throw these numbers out and you have no context, people believe the numbers are significant in themselves, and they're not. They're only significant relative to each other, and as I pointed out, relative to each other, they're not significant at all, except that Google and Apple have significantly more treasuries than Russia, and Google and Apple aren't significant holders in the aggregate in overall U.S. Treasury holdings. All right. Ben Zidrex says, it's an endless story. Yep. The story never ends. Song remains the same. Something like that. H. Zilla. So Silicon Valley doesn't have full faith in having their full net worth owning their own stock entirely. Nor should they. That's not like, aha. They don't own their stock and look what they're doing. They're putting it elsewhere. Part of corporate treasury management always includes having cash and cash equivalents and then perhaps some long-term investments. But generally, the treasury needs to have cash for acquisitions. If you read through them, they'll explain what they need the cash for. The first is for operating expenses, just cash flow, even if, and they need to have, and the more cash that a company has, the more then they have to find places for it. If they can't use it to grow their business or buy stock or to make acquisitions, they have to put it somewhere. So treasury management is very important. The other thing they have to worry about, Abzilla, is they don't want to be deemed to be an investment company and then be subject to the Investment Company Act of 1940. So there's a lot of treasury management that goes on. And again, you don't hear this because they don't know this. So they just say someone's dumping treasuries, or they might get from this. Google and Apple have so many treasuries. That's not the takeaway from all this. All right. NYC Bit. I see love and hearts, and well, that's always nice, I suppose. Dr. Modesto, what's that weird thumping sound? I don't know. I don't know if it's something in my office, if someone was walking, or, it could be. I'm making a point, and then I'm going to make a point. The next thing you know, sorry for your ears. I might have been moving I don't know. But thanks for letting me know. Miser, thank you. And I totally skipped the pumper headlines. Remember 2015. 2015. Most of your headlines are pumper. Unfortunately, that's the nature of media. The nature of media is the nature of everything. Sales, you have to create immediacy. You can't just give them. People don't buy, and this is a fact, they don't buy on reason, and they also don't consume their media on reason. That's why this channel doesn't have, there's other reasons probably too, doesn't have 20,000 views. In fact, I know I put out ridiculous headlines and I've attracted 4,000 and 5,000 views for just saying gold to $28,523 and silver to be at the same price. And everybody wants to see that. People like to look at train wrecks. People like to hear hype. People claim that they don't. Everyone does. People claim they don't like gossip. Everyone does. So that's the only thing different here is I'm not saying I don't like hype, but I try to stay away from it, and I try to analyze things. All right. Dr. Modesto, Mark Cuban says he likes a huge sack of cash to make distressed purposes when the opportunity arises. Well, that's true if you're an investment. Now, companies, depending on the nature of the company, some companies by nature, they live off acquisitions, so they need to always have a healthy cash balance to be opportunistic. Like, for example, the silver and gold streamers that we talk about, that's all they do. They have to have cash so they can buy mines and they can buy streams from those mines. Other companies that are not acquisitive, see, Apple really doesn't acquire that many companies, so that's why they have a big cash hoard. But companies like Cisco, they're always AMD, they might always acquire a chip manufacturer. They may acquire some software. So there are companies that are going to need cash set aside for acquisitions. Other companies may not. Joshua, hello, Joshua. Mark Cuban is a never Trump or hack fraud. You know what's interesting? I want to divert here. I see this Dershowitz guy. Now, Dershowitz is a dyed-in-the-wool, ACLU liberal, but he has a sense of fairness and justice. And because he thinks that the way that the special counsel is set up and the pre-dawn raids on Manafort, the raid on Cohen, he finds that as offensive to his sense of fair play and legality. But because it ends up defending Trump, his liberal buddies are shunning him. And now they're making fun of him because he's mentioning that in his elite circles on Martha's Vineyard, he doesn't get invited to the dinner parties at Martha's Vineyard where they drink Chardonnay and who knows what else they do there. And that's kind of disturbing because what they're saying is you cannot stray from the course even if you think you're right. So, for example, during the civil rights movement, if you just look at it's like what is that movie? To Kill a Mockingbird. The guy's innocent. It doesn't matter whether he's black or white. And they're really against Gregory Peck in the movie because he was defending a black man. And they're actually looking at Dershowitz. I'm not trying to make an analogy. The analogy I'm trying to make is that all he's doing, he doesn't like Trump at all. But that's irrelevant. What he's saying is you have to afford everyone. You can't decide you don't like the fact that you lost the election and start harassing them using the FBI and the CIA because logically and rationally, that's what they'll do to you if you find that acceptable. And he's just saying he doesn't like that, but they're not giving him an inch. They're making fun of him, saying, oh, boo-hoo, you deserve it. You know, you're a Nazi sympathizer because you're supporting Trump. And he's actually trying to not be a Nazi sympathizer. He's trying to not go along with this mob mentality that you have to go and get Trump. All right, Joshua. Dershowitz is an enemy plan who gets himself listened to. Well, that's another discussion. I'm making a surface point here that anybody who leaves the groupthink that is one thing is groupthink, but the other thing is when the groupthink is so skewed in one direction, meaning we have to get Trump, and anyone who says anything positive about Trump. So if Trump says it's noon and you say it's noon, they're going to hate you for that because you're agreeing with Trump. That's the danger. I don't know the rest about Dershowitz, but some of the stuff that he says makes sense because he's saying that the law has to be applied equally. And they're like, no, the law can't be applied equally if Donald Trump is involved. It's the same argument that they made with the travel ban. The law was very clear that the president has the right to exclude any class of alien. And basically what they were saying was any president but Trump has that right, not realizing then you don't have the rule of law, that you just basically don't afford, you pick and choose who gets the law, who gets the benefit of the law and who doesn't. And that creates the idea of the two-tier justice system, even though you say, oh, boo-hoo, Donald Trump he's not at the bottom of the pile. But they were actually saying is he's not allowed because of what we think of him to implement a travel ban. A travel ban, not a travel ban. So anyway, I didn't mean to get off on that tangent, but I saw that today, and it's interesting how once you get a point to your fervency, and it's the same thing, you see it in the gold and silver market. Someone sold their silver. Traitor! I heard him. He doesn't like silver anymore. You've gone too far. If someone wants to give you a rational reason why they don't like silver anymore, but once you got to the point where silver or Trump hating, whatever it is, has become a passion of which you can't even think of anything that might dissuade you of that, that's when you've become, I think you've lost your reason. All right. Dershowitz thought that O.J. Simpson was innocent. Yeah, this is not to defend. See, again, what people are doing is they're criticizing Dershowitz now, and I don't know. This isn't about Dershowitz. This is about the mentality, but this is exactly what happens: is people lose their focus on the point, and they start saying, "Well, Dershowitz is this, and Dershowitz is that, and he's a liberal, and he." No, my point is that anyone can say something that makes sense. And I believe that you should be able to, no matter who says it, it's more important what's said than who says it. And I don't care if it's Dershowitz. If Dershowitz says it's noon, and if Hillary Clinton says it's noon, I've always hated Hillary Clinton, I'll agree with her. I'm not going to argue with her. I'm not going to start saying Pizzagate and all this other stuff. It has nothing to do with whether it's noon or not. And most people don't. 95% of people, I don't think, get that. I think they want to always not give into reason. They want to always point out why that person is deficient, why you shouldn't defend him. And again, I don't think Dershowitz is defending Trump. He's defending a point of view that perhaps you shouldn't use the FBI to undermine an election. And of course, they don't even want to hear it. They just say he's working for Fox because they're not listening to him. I'll be the devil advocate. Trump told his father, if I lose, it'll be rigged, rip the country to pieces. It's possible. I mean, who knows? That's the other thing. People think they know everything. They think they know the Rothschilds are up to this and the Illuminati are doing that. And I don't believe any of that stuff. How do they know? Oh, I saw it on YouTube. Okay. Hey, Zilla, justice is random, arbitrary, and capricious. Well, that's a fact. And I think that's all Dershowitz is saying. I don't know. That doesn't mean I agree. I'm a defender of Dershowitz. I agree with Dershowitz. I agree with Trump. It doesn't mean anything. I'm just saying that he is not allowed to have a point of view that doesn't flow, that everything that he says has to flow to being against Trump. Because if what he says inures to the benefit of Trump, now he's a Trump defender. That's the logic in all of this. And they can't have that. They can't have somebody defending in their mind Trump. They actually think he's defending him. He's not. He's criticizing the practices used to go after him. Shark Air is in the house. Hello, Shark Air. Dr. Modesto Esquire. I posit that legal justice and morality are often two different things. Well, that's a very good point. That's very true. And I think what you're having, let's use the travel ban case, for example. There is a morality that the minority thought that Trump was a racist and that what he was doing was, in their minds, immoral because he had said that he wanted to keep Muslims out of the United States. Now, even though the travel ban did not accomplish that because I think 85% of the Muslim world can still come to the United States, and it also wasn't just Muslims that were included in the ban. You had North Korea and Venezuela. So they tried to rule not legality, but on morality. They tried to say that he's not allowed to do this because he's immoral. Now, in that case, you have to question whose morals. So that's why I believe that in some instances, the law has to rule in certain things where the law is clear cut. Because if the law produces an immoral result, then you change the law. You shouldn't. It's very dangerous when you impose morality onto the law, unless the law is totally unjust. But that's why you can change laws. And I think that's what we have in the Supreme Court when they choose the new Supreme Court justice, is whether they are going to pick somebody who's going to interpret the law the way it is, or whether they want somebody who's just going to make stuff up because of their morality and because of what they want. Now, the problem with justices doing morality is not only does it go against the concept of law, but also goes against the concept of who elected them to impose their morality. They're just there. I view them as referees. They're not there to pick what the right morals are. So there's a difference in judicial philosophy, whereas the left wants judges to impose their morality on the law, and the strict constitutionalists look at it and they say they want to just interpret the law. So that's where it is. I don't know. I think you're going to get somebody more to the right, and that generally means a more strict constitutionalist. Shark Air, OJ was innocent until proven guilty. Okay. Dr. Modesto, hating Islam isn't racist. Mine was a white guy. But yeah, and again, see, I mentioned that. It wasn't meant to spark a discussion what's racist. I was using that point of view to show what the judges, how they wanted to think. That's what they thought, and therefore that's what guided their their judicial reasoning, which I thought wasn't judicial reasoning. I thought it was just them trying to impose the morality. The idea in this case is not to debate whether they're right or wrong, but whether what they did was right or wrong. Because that's what they did was exactly the same thing, was bringing in what Trump said on the campaign trail has nothing to do with whether the statute says he could do it and whether the order itself says complies with the statute. What they did was they brought in, oh, but Trump said this. That's not how you adjudicate a case. You look at, does the statute say you can do it? And what does the statute say? Does the order do what the statute allows it to do? If the answer is yes, then you're done. But they didn't want to be done. They wanted to argue that he's not allowed to avail himself to the statute because he is a racist. But the issue isn't whether he's a racist or not, or whether his views are racist or not, or whether their views are right or wrong. My point is that that's just getting sidetracked, and I think that's a big distraction. To me, the question is, get to the point. And was the point, did he have the authority to do it? And the answer is yes. If you want to argue that he's immoral, then vote him out of office. You want to argue that the law shouldn't be there, shouldn't give the president that right, then change the law. But don't come in and say, well, the law would be okay if it was Obama or if it was Jimmy Carter or George Bush, but not with Donald Trump. Well, then you're just changing things on the fly. And that's dangerous because you don't have the rule of law. All right. 70% of the population doesn't want Roe versus Wade overturned. That might produce a bleak turnout. Yeah, the problem with Roe versus Wade isn't whether people want it. Again, if that's something people want, then that's what the legislatures are. That's what the states are for. And what the case is, the case just invented abortion rights. There are no abortion rights. They had to create penumbra. If you read the decision, it's on shaky ground other than wanting to come to a decision. And there are other ways. And it's a matter of philosophy, is how does a society pick what it's going to allow and what it's not going to allow? But this idea that the court is going to allow something, I think it's flawed, because it's 9 people. If it's 5-4 one way, 5-4 the other, then all of a sudden it's the law of the entire land. It's probably better that people decide locally how they want to handle certain issues. But of course, when you want to get your way, you want it nationally. All right, good point. All right, well, that about does it. Didn't mean to get off on that, but just keep in mind that Silicon Valley does have treasuries. Robert says we should abolish SCOTUS and just have state Supreme Court. Well, you can get into the same discussion that the way that senators are elected. We should probably go back to having the senators be appointed by the state legislatures. I mean, you need to devolve, I think, the federal power for many reasons. That's where your corruption happens, because that's where the largest piece is, and that's where you get the least responsive government, because it's furthest away and it's the largest. And that's the other thing that you have with certain political factions, are they want other parts of the country to live the way they live. And so the reason I think the South lost the Civil War was they weren't trying to go to the North and tell them they had to have slavery. They weren't trying to go to the North and tell them they had to live the way they lived. But the North was going to the South, and that's the reason. They were trying to change a society, and they did. Now, in that case, you can argue that that one's an easy one. You say, well, it was a moral case. But it goes beyond that. It's not just slavery. It could be, we don't want you drinking big gulp cups, and we're going to make people, not just in my city, but across the country, not drink that. So it becomes a matter of, where do you draw the line in how important are issues that they need to be universal? Obviously, you could say slavery should be universally abolished, but should big gulps be universally abolished? And that's where I think it becomes a question of philosophy, which is not what we started This was about Silicon Valley. U.S. Treasury hoard. Oh, I agree. It was far better to have senators creatures of the state. The very concept of a constitutional republic is that the nodal network of distributed control is superior to a centralized system. Yes, Big Gulp is inherently racist, especially if you feel like, oh, no, I'm not going to go there. Okay, JR. All right, we're going to end tonight, and I want to thank everyone for joining, and join me again tomorrow night at this time at 8 o'clock. Thanks very much. All right, so...